Well, we're going to move into our key program for today, and Tammy and Matt, thanks very much for being here, and John Carlson is going to help as well. So a little context here, and then I'll introduce you guys, and we'll kind of get rolling on this. So we've invited Tammy and Matt, who are sort of founding players in a really large project called the Grassland Roadmap. So thinking context of what CMR is, you know, we were formed 10, 12 years ago around all the issues that are impacting this particular part of the Northern Plains. And we actually represent a very important part of the Northern Plains where there's still a lot of fairly large unfragmented grasslands. There's a lot of players, at times a fair amount of conflict, but this group was formed to bring all those various players that have a really strong interest, you know, ranchers, government, NGOs, wildlife people, just the whole gamut. So we could have these discussions about how can we collaborate and do our best to create the best outcome for this region, for our communities, and for the landscape. As I participated in that, I was sort of invited to be part of the planning committee for the Grassland Roadmap, and they've taken this type of approach across the entire grassland biome of North America. So we're talking around 600 million acres. And this effort's been going on for, I don't know exactly when it was initiated, but Tammy played an important role. Tammy works with, she's director of the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And I think she was the one that sort of prompted this idea because of the noticeable decline of grassland birds over the last 50 years is really significant. So they actually, Tammy has presented before a few years ago to this group, but things have really advanced. And so Tammy and Matt are going to kind of bring us up to speed with where the Grassland Roadmap is at, where we're going. And I'm hoping one of my motivations in this is that not only with the CMR working group, but I'm thinking of ACES and RSA and even other groups, become more formal kind of support partners for this effort, which doesn't require us to do anything different than what we're doing, but have more of an intention to see our sort of synergistic relationship between what the Grassland Roadmap is trying to do. I've had the opportunity to visit with ranchers from Mexico to Canada throughout the plains, and just, yeah, how do we go about taking care of a particular biome that's really been quite impacted and changed over the last 100 years. So with that, I think, well, we were actually going to have John and Paul just going to give a little context from your point of view, right?
You know, actually, I think I'll let Tammy go through this first because that'll set the stage for the conversation and all that later.
And Paul, you're good with that? You probably didn't even know you're going to do this, right?
I'll cover it for you.
So Paul, this is good. So Tammy, I'm just, you know, we're just finishing our update. It's always amazing just how many things are going on with different players up here, but really looking forward to your presentation and having some discussion about how we might relate to this project. So please.
Thank you, Bill. Can you hear me okay?
Very good.
Okay, do I have permission to share screen?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Okay, Matt, while I share my screen, why don't you introduce yourself so then I can fumble a little bit.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tammy. Great to see you all. Sure wish I could be up there with you in person. I'm jealous of John Carlson and Bill, who I've gotten to work with a lot over the last 3 years. I am the kind of main coordinator, facilitator for the roadmap project. I was hired and brought on in early 2020. And my main work is to try to include as many voices in this project as possible. It's a huge biome, so there's a lot of interest, a lot of people out there, but we've tried to create an inclusive process that informs this roadmap and represents a lot of the people and sectors and organizations that are out there. So great to be with you all today, and I'm looking forward to this presentation and our conversation.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, hopefully everyone can see everything okay, and I'll just jump in. So I first want to start out, of course, with gratitude to Bill and Molly for the opportunity to be here. And Bill already introduced John, but if you want to raise your hand, John, again. I hope, honestly, most of you have heard of the Central Grassland Roadmap, and that through this conversation that you'll see strong alignment with the CMR Community Working Group, as well as your personal goals and interests. Yet Bill already talked about, we're working at the biome scale to elevate grasslands as a priority landscape, to ensure we have a viable future for people, communities, wildlife, soil, water, birds, and more. It's also important, though, that the work we're doing is stepped down and fosters local collaboratives like the CMR. So we're learning, adapting, thriving, and ultimately ensuring resilient places, people, and wildlife for the future. It's locally informed and driven, and it rolls up to the greater biome needs. And I know a lot of you already feel the tension, but we're at a tipping point. What we do in the next 10 years is really going to define this region for generations to come. And it's not just the grasslands. Is everything okay?
Are your slide, have you been advancing slides? Because we're just seeing your first slide.
Nope.
Okay,
I'm just giving
wanted to
you.
make sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so what we do in the next 10 years is really going to define this region for generations to come. And it's not just the grasslands that are at risk, it's the wildlife we love, our climate, our health, and the people who live here. And this is a complicated vision, but we're just trying to show this is a shared governance model. And you'll see over here that the land stewards are a main component in the effort. And we have ranchers across 3 countries who've come to meetings and are part of different planning efforts, including Bill and Tata from New Mexico. They're ranchers and they're serving on the planning team. And as Bill touched on, Bird Conservancy has been the convening organization just to help catalyze this collaborative effort. And we have more than 10 working groups with over 100 active people contributing with knowledge and expertise in policy, metrics, communication. And I hope you'll see that this Central Grasslands Roadmap is an umbrella effort to raise awareness, interest, and support for grasslands across 3 countries, and setting the stage, the buffet table of opportunities that can be adopted, modified, and be made more relevant at the local scales, from countries to joint ventures to states to communities like CMR. And I just thought it would be wise to take a minute and just share the vision that's been developed over the past 3+ years. And hopefully you see a lot of what you care about in your values in this vision, from places to people to wildlife to water to resilient grasslands. And what we've heard through 2 summits, multiple surveys, engagement through newsletters, and other communication is, from this 7-sector, multiple indigenous nations in 3 countries, we really care about and want to have humans at the core of our work. And we also want to encourage and promote the producer way of life. We want to keep large tracts of native grasslands intact. We want practices that are supported by research. We want to respect and honor diverse voices, from indigenous to private landowners to ejidos. And we want to make sure that local knowledge is included. We want to improve land health, support ecosystem processes, improve biodiversity, conserve water, increase habitat, and arrest population declines. And Bill touched on this, but in the Journal of Science in 2019, several collaborative partners had been working for years, and they documented that over the last 50 years, we've lost 3 billion birds. And 1 in 4, or 720 million of those birds lost, are grassland birds. In Colorado alone, species like the chestnut-colored longspur that you see here in the bottom right, and the lesser prairie chicken, if we don't change their trajectories, we won't have them in 30 years from now. And I just wanted to take a minute to engage your senses, to visualize our grasslands, to hear the lark buntings, the western meadowlarks, the grasshopper sparrows that dominate this landscape and bring song to our communities, the grasslands that are out there. But I also want to recognize what we do today will impact tomorrow. And these concerns are going to impact the future of our birds and our people. And I want us to think about, will the chorus be there for our grandchildren? And will our grandchildren be able to be on these lands? Now, I just hope you'll take a minute with me, and I want you to think like a bird. I want you to visualize being a bird. Hopefully many of you are familiar with this. This is the lark bunting. It's about 6 inches long. See that deep conical bill? It's going to eat a lot of seeds. It looks like it's wearing its tuxedo. It's got its black suit on with its nice little white accents in the wing. This bird winters in Mexico, and then it'll travel north, and it'll come across Colorado, Nebraska, and into its breeding grounds, which includes Montana and even farther north. And I want you to think, as this bird's flying across the landscape, it can't tell as it's crossing states or countries. It can't tell where one ranch starts and another ranch ends. It can't tell what's private, what's Forest Service or BLM land or Indigenous Nation lands. What it sees is, as it's looking down, is that a place it can stop? Can it fuel up? Or can it be a place to breed? Does it have enough food, cover, shelter, water for it? So can it find what it needs? And the challenge we're seeing with our grassland birds is there's less and less places for them to raise a healthy brood of lark buntings. So what we need to do is think and act like lark buntings without borders. So as I mentioned, birds don't recognize borders. And for the lark bunting and every species in our grasslands, including us, we need to move beyond borders. And we need to stitch a tapestry of our work together in how we manage, how we provide access and opportunity, and how we share knowledge and information. Many of you are sitting in this room and you know that our climate and the conditions of the land have changed. Is our knowledge adapting? Are our practices adapting to this changing environment? Are we learning? Are we able to take risks? Can we try new practices? Are we incorporating new voices? Are we bringing Western science and traditional knowledge together? As partners, are we helping buffer the risk and incentivizing innovation? And then are we sharing this across borders? Are we being innovative in terms of public land management, from our national grasslands to our refuges, within and beyond fences, neighbor to neighbor? And are we trying new technologies and approaches? In bird conservation, we've historically focused on specific species, specific groups of species, how they're doing, and we really wanted to elevate them as a priority. But what we did was sometimes create borders between the birds, the places, and the habitats that they need and the people that live there. But we're working to change that. We're shifting our thinking from protecting individual bird species to landscapes, from the silos of birds, places, and people to bringing it together. This social and ecological, the interconnectivity of humans and being part of the ecosystem. This honors our land stewards. This also aligns with Indigenous ways. At the end of the day, people will determine the future of our birds, our wildlife, and our grasslands. So they have to be the core for enduring conservation. So we have to take a multidisciplinary approach, from the soils to the plants to the wildlife to the people. So we start with the grasslands as their foundation. With those grasslands, how are we improving aquifers? How are we improving water above ground? How are we protecting the soil and the livelihood of the people on the land? If we protect the grasslands, we'll protect the culture and traditions, from the ranchers to the indigenous communities that have been stewarding these places for generations, if not thousands of years. Grasslands don't recognize borders. We have to think beyond the borders. These extend 3 countries, dozens of states, hundreds of indigenous sovereign nations, and thousands of ranches, farmers, and pastures. It's huge. And the forces threatening our grasslands are huge, from shrub and tree encroachment to conversion to climate change. It's way bigger and more complex than one entity can solve. So that's the inspiration behind the Central Grasslands Roadmap. It's a paradigm shift, focusing on 4 key strategies, working across Canada, the US, and Mexico, elevating and inviting indigenous voices at the onset, bringing together 7 sectors from private landowners to industry, to federal agencies, to foundations, to academics, and focusing on grasslands first versus certain species or groups. So this is a recent map that was updated actually just yesterday by the World Wildlife Fund, and it just shows the status of our grasslands. It also includes some of our urban areas. As you zoom in, you'll see some of our bigger water bodies where we also have some natural forests out there like the Black Hills. But this is a 700 million acre biome. 60% has been converted or degraded by tree and shrub invasion. That's the areas you see in purple. And currently we're losing 4 million acres to the plow or to that invasion of trees and shrubs. Of the 40%, the green and yellow still remaining, 130 million, almost half, is over soils suitable for conversion, or it's already experiencing early invasion of trees and shrubs. So as we think about this, how do we grow the core? Can we work voluntarily and collaboratively to keep grass side up, healthy, resilient? Can we set some big lofty goals, like 100 million acres in the next 10 years? So can we affect 50 million acres of the green core? That includes keeping the grass side up, improving, enhancing grazing management, dealing with invasive annual grasses. Can we use tools like short and long-term leases or easements? Improving soil health. Can we incentivize a grass-based economy? Everything voluntary. Can we affect 30 to 40% of the yellow areas through leases, easements, addressing those early invasion of trees and shrubs? And in the purple, can we address strategically the invasion and cultivation and make sure that we literally see the grasses pushing back into these areas that are either on soils that never should have been converted to crop, or where we have strong invasion of woody species. And let's face it, when we work in the green and yellow, our acres and restoration efforts are under $100 an acre. When we have to push into the purple, it's hundreds of dollars. So we want to be as most proactive and economic as we can be. And ultimately, the roadmap is meant to ensure that actions cumulatively match the scope and scale of the threats of our grasslands, that all voices are elevated, and everyone sees themselves in the effort and opportunities. The ultimate outcome is to save our grasslands. And it's good to do a pulse check. Does it work? Are there other models that have showed success? Does coming together across borders work? Does focusing on people and place work? Is there reason for optimism? So this ugly little chart here is actually showing you different trends of different groups of bird species. So if you're below 0, you're in decline. If you're above 0, you're increasing. And what we saw decades ago as our wetlands and waterfowl were declining, the community rallied, they came together, they focused on place, they got resources through the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, and they started working across borders on wetlands. The health of our waterfowl, so that report that I said, that showed 3 billion birds lost and all these declines, our waterfowl and water birds are improving. So there are models out there that exist. So how can we do that for our grasslands, our grassland places, and grassland birds? So it's important that we have meaningful engagement, and all people from indigenous to ranchers to businesses to partners, we need to make sure we all have a seat at the table, and we actually change the approach and we think of circles. So we have trust, we welcome wisdom, we all have kind of a shared responsibility and shared voice. And we also make sure we don't just always elevate the dominant voices, that we elevate all voices. And as the famous Bill Milton said, relationships and conservation will occur at the speed of trust. So inclusion has been a big theme of the roadmap. And it's important to look around the room and look around your communities and be honest about who are we talking to and who are we missing and how can we invite more people to be part of the solution. And we recognize with this that we need to honor and respect sovereignty for Indigenous nations. We also need to honor private property rights for landowners. We need to engage Indigenous communities at the onset and let them decide how they want to engage and define. We need to make sure we're integrating traditional knowledge, cultural values, and Western science, and that our programs reflect multiple values, and that we have support and capacity for communities to engage. We need to eliminate barriers that deny access to programs, rethink the requirements to actually access programs, and the amazing paperwork associated with these federal programs. So it's always, I think, why I want to just do that gut check. It's not a bunch of people coming out and telling ranchers what you have to do and coming on your land. It's about elevating what you're already doing, where you're having success. You're already achieving with these conversations with the CMR and RSA and Win at ACES. But we need to move those practices beyond borders so they have wider reach, greater impact. And that includes that sharing of information, neighbor to neighbor, across culture, and across nations. It needs to be coordinated, integrated, and innovative. And that's precisely what the Central Grasslands Roadmap is trying to do. We've had 2 summits now, one virtual and one in person in May in 2022. And like Bill said, we had ranchers in Montana talking to ranchers in Canada and Mexico. We had the 3 countries, multiple nations, and the 7 sectors in elevating the importance of grasslands and going back and making sure that there being a voice for grasslands. And people walked away and took action, and it's all of our actions that matter. Whether it was Tutta Libby Cruz, a rancher in New Mexico, who went back to her community and is now creating a 4-H competition for youth to make sure they understand grasslands, and they also care about birds and other resources out there. We had Cheyenne Wakpe from First Nations Canada go back and develop a grassland strategy for her community. You'll see that the Department of Interior has elevated grasslands as a legacy landscape. You also have the National Wildlife Federation trying to advance the North American Grassland Conservation Act, modeled after the successful North American Wetlands Conservation Act. You had 50 organizations elevate the Grasslands and You campaign. You have multiple organizations that are trying to speak to, Secretary of Interior and their staff, including Greenberger, talking to the chief of the NRCS, Cosby, and trying to really elevate the importance of a grass-based economy. You also have Bill Milton bringing us together today to help further conversations, actions, and partnerships. So I went big, I went 3 countries, but I also want to start kind of honing that down. So this is the Northern Great Plains Joint Venture region. Catherine Wyman is the coordinator. Erin, if you're in the room, if you would just raise your hand. Just want to make sure that we know she's here as well. And the Northern Great Plains Joint Venture is implementing the roadmap priorities. This region covers 98 million acres, or about 12% of that 700 million acres. But it provides over 25% of the grasslands still intact and in existence in this region. It provides breeding habitat for 5 of the most imperiled grassland birds, including chestnut and thick-billed longspurs, as well as Baird sparrows and pipits. It is ground zero for grassland conservation. And by helping keep a strong ranching economy and community, we can maintain a culture of resilient grasslands. It's working with ranchers to keep the grass green side up, investments in range enhancements and economically sustainable ranching, especially in those core areas in the green. In the yellow areas, the joint venture is working with landowners to transition expiring conservation reserve program lands to managed rangelands instead of having it revert back to crops. So it's retaining those grassland resources on the landscape and building bigger blocks. They're also supporting people and stewarding the rangelands. They worked with Winnett ACES with a landowner peer-to-peer wet meadow restoration workshop, and then a repairing project to deal with salt cedar along the Musselshell River. They supported ACES and their staff participation in soil health training so they can bring those resources back to the community. And they're providing financial support for private lands biologists in key locations in Montana, Wyoming, and South Dakota. And starting this year, the joint venture is hosting private lands biologist forums to facilitate information sharing and networking, bringing additional cost share opportunities through the Northern Great Plains, their restoration incentive program to improve range enhancement and restoration work to supplement programs out there. And then they're using science to expand conservation impact. In Montana and South Dakota, they're working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Prairie Potholes Joint Venture to bring science into targeting planning for EQIP and helping address local resource needs that impact grasslands at a larger scale. They're bringing grassland burden assessment maps to planning meetings to help guide decisions. And they're working to understand outcomes for conservation actions, working with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies on effectiveness of grassland and mesic restoration work, working with social scientists out of the University of Wyoming like Drew Bennett so that we can understand and inform what are the values, the needs, how do we have conservation conversations and make sure our programs reflect the economic realities and the priorities of the people living on the landscapes. So let's go a little more local. This is a map of Colorado, could have been a map of Montana, but I want to scale down and think about if we share information, we get contagious and contiguous conservation across communities, and we can scale to that landscape impact. So if we think about scenario A, these are isolated sites of conservation. But how can those inspire neighbor to neighbor and managing across fences and taking that system approach? Our soils, our plants, our pollinators, our birds move across these places. So which moves us more to the idea of B, where we're thinking, innovating, and managing at scales that matter to the ecosystem and how they function, from soils to water to wildlife. So we don't want to manage in isolation. The CMR is a catalyst on the landscape. I'm going to turn this over to Matt just to start setting the stage for our breakouts. But we really want to be thinking about what could be some goals that this community could set around improved, restored, and conserved areas. What could be some realistic things we could strive for in acres in the green and the yellow and the purple? What additional information can you bring in that will help you with more local data, soils, water, birds, invasives? How we can work with partners like NRCS on a targeted implementation plan for the area if there isn't one, or expand one if there is. How can we get more of the GRIP dollars on the ground through the Northern Great Plains Joint Venture? What other ideas do you have? What do you want to elevate and give a megaphone to? What's missing? And are there future meetings that you would want to host? So with that, I'm going to give it to you, Matt.
Yeah, so that's really what we're here for today, is to continue that conversation about how the roadmap can support and elevate what you all are working on and include your voices in what we're doing, and then create that continuity and connectivity to other places within the biome where we can channel out that information, that knowledge, those experiences, and share that across the biome. And so I'm always struck by the green, and just as a reminder, that green takes people and ungulates and grazers to be out there. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about what we can do in that green and yellow that includes people. So I'm going to go through 2 slides of the questions I think Tammy just said, let people kind of preview the questions that we have. And then we want to hear from you all, though, any questions you have after Tammy's presentation. And then we'll go into, I think, some type of breakout group discussion on these questions. So kind of setting the stage to get these in your mind, and then we'll kind of open it up. So what would you want others to know about the CMR Community Working Group? Like, what can we elevate across the biome? What challenges are you still facing today in terms of collaborating effectively? One of the roadmap priorities is to increase support of collaborative initiatives. So how can we increase and support your work? Go to the next slide, Tammy. And then the other topic area, another roadmap priority is increasing support for what's working out there on the landscape, as well as identifying new innovations and being able to scale those innovations and sharing those out. So what's working for you when it comes to range improvement, cattle production, and partnering with federal partners, what's working with state and NGO partners and foundations, and what isn't working. What must be done to get more of groups like CMR and Win It Aces and others involved? What are the barriers that we still need to overcome? What are the fears of engaging in something like the roadmap as a biome effort? And those 3 buckets of land conservation, restoration, do those 3 buckets of land conservation, restoration, and enhancement resonate with you? Is there a 4th bucket or a new innovation that we need to be thinking about? So thinking about that map and those categories of working in the green, yellow, and purple. I think those were our questions, Tammy, that we want to get at. But again, that's just a preview. We'd like to pause there. And for anybody else on Zoom or anybody in the room, and John and Bill, maybe you can help moderate this part with folks in the room. But questions you have for the roadmap team, including Tammy and I and Bill and John.
Right, I think we'll begin. I just want to check with you, Molly, because looking at the main agenda, I think we're going to do breakouts here in the next few minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, that'll work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing is just, what's come up with anyone just hearing this presentation, and any questions you might have for Matt, for Tammy. And then the goal when we plan this is that, one of the things we don't do it every meeting, but when we have a presentation like this, we break into smaller groups so people can kind of feel more comfortable talking about how they feel about whatever topic it is we're talking about, which is this. So just right off the bat, anyone have a direct question before we actually get into breakout groups for Tammy or Matt?
I'll go
Please,
first.
yeah.
So with everything turning purple, is this because, great wording, anyways, is it because they're subdividing all these different properties and then people are putting in lawns or maybe shelter belts and things like that? I mean, we're trying to help with pollinators, but if it's, how do we get people to have grassland and pollinators? But is a lot of that because of people building?
Well, I'll let Tammy, you want to take that one?
I'll start, but I'll let people with more knowledge to the north add in. But from the southern perspective, it is actually just because the conditions of our grasslands are declining. We're getting more desertification, and we're seeing invasive shrubs and trees just creeping across the landscape. Some of the tools that used to help with that, anywhere from including fire. Obviously, there is some community concern about fire, but at least in the south, it is a combination of desertification, different management scenarios, but we're seeing a pretty big creep. And what we are also noticing is, we have landowners that are using fire and setting it back, but if their neighbors aren't, then those seeds just disperse back onto those grasslands. So it needs to, again, be at that community level, figure out how to use tools, how to manage some of those risks, but return some of the tools to the landscape that haven't been there. And then, as we did promote shelter belts quite a bit, just like we promoted salt cedar along riparian areas to stabilize banks. And sometimes we find out a couple decades later that whoops. So it's a combination of things. And I think also, if I can just be honest, it's a lack of appreciation of just grasslands as grasslands, and what they do for our climate and how they help cool the climate. But we also, I get it. I've been on many ranches, and we want to have trees up by our house in that shelter belt, but we've got to keep those trees maintained there, because eventually they can start spreading out into the prairie. And again, we're seeing it more on the eastern side, moving into the west. But as you get more urbanites and more little developments and parcels, everybody wants trees and shade, and they don't just stay where you put them. If anybody else wants to add to that, John, or yeah.
Actually, no, I thought,
I can pick.
can we just, yeah, segue to what you were
Sure.
talking about?
So what you saw on that map is essentially the combination of the two main threats to grasslands at the biome level. And that's the invasive trees, which we don't experience like they do in Nebraska or Kansas, where they've lost tons of forage over the years to invasive trees. And they're insidious because they don't really notice them. It's not like it goes from grasslands to a tilled field in a planting season. But it happens gradually over years, and all of a sudden you go, wow, I can't put that many cows in the pasture anymore because I don't get grass. It's all trees. And so we've been able to document how many tons of forage we've lost across Kansas and South Dakota and Nebraska. It's staggering. And our NRCS Central Grasslands Working Lands for Wildlife Initiative, Dr. Duroc Twidwell, who helped us put that map together, is kind of in the forefront of documenting that and providing that to producers to say, if you don't start taking care of your trees, you're going to look at what Kansas looks like now, Nebraska. And so the sooner you can get ahead of it, the more economical, as Tammy said, it is to treat it. It's much easier. And when it completely reverts to a wooded system, you lose all of these grassland values, including the grass. So that's one that I didn't fully appreciate. I grew up in Montana. I've been working in grasslands and sagebrush for my entire life, really. I didn't really appreciate the conifer encroachment. It was all my work was centered around the loss to conversion. Until I got into this job and started working with my colleagues in NRCS, like looking south and across the biome and go, oh my God, this is something we need to pay attention to now in the northern part. The other part of that map is the conversion of grass to crop. And so when we combine those, that's what shows in purple. What's left in grass is green in the bigger blocks. And we do have grass in the purple. Those core areas for, say, Iowa are a hell of a lot smaller than they are in Montana, but they're no less valuable. So we're trying to prioritize where we do our work. And it makes more sense to do work where we actually have grass and keep that grass and grow it than try to make grass in the purple areas. So it's trying to get out in front of those threats from the conifers and the conversion to maintain those large blocks of grass for, like Tammy has said so eloquently, the people that live out there, and where we're coming at it from the service side is we have trust responsibilities for the wildlife out there. Those grassland birds is the intersection. And we realize that we won't have those. This is a predominantly private landscape. We have to work with the people living there. We won't have those as our trust responsibility unless we do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So to just build off of that, thanks, Bill. My job is very similar to what you saw from that Tammy used that example in the Northern Great Plains Joint Venture and all of the work they're doing there. I could do a very similar presentation from the work the Fish and Wildlife Service is doing. So my job is to kind of stitch together what the refuges are doing, what our ecological services staff are. So the refuge or the Fish and Wildlife Service, I've come to appreciate, has many different entities within it. And there's people that work on endangered species, that people work on wildlife refuges. There's people that work in sciences, which where I'm housed, migratory birds. So all of those efforts, we have had kind of disparate efforts. Some places work very well with partners, other places don't, but we haven't really tried to pull together our own work so that we're coordinated and collaborative together internally. So I've got that as part of my job. And then the other part is working with external partners. And that's why I'm involved with the roadmap to pull together at the large scale, the partners that we can start seeing some synergy and build that political will to, when you start talking about this, a lot of people across this biome pulling together, all of a sudden that has a lot more ears to people making decisions on funding than separate little groups scattered across the biome. So it's trying to pull all of that together and get working in the same direction. I'm not one.
Yeah, for that.
Like with the invasives, a lot of work that I would say we're kind of looking at and we've talked about quite a bit. Besides just the conifer encroachment would be the annual grasses.
Yes.
Is that included in that
So,
as well?
no,
Okay.
and I gotta back up one little bit. So I'm doing the grassland stuff. I actually have a counterpart within the Fish and Wildlife Service working on sagebrush, doing the exact same thing. And the neat part about Montana that I really love is that those efforts overlap in Montana. Because the sagebrush biome overlaps with the grasslands biome, and we're in this really unique place in North America where both of those exist together. And going out and seeing sage grouse and then seeing some of the birds that Tammy talked about in the same area is really unique in North America. In this part of the world. So we also have that sagebrush side. They've been much more focused on annual invasives because that's a major driver in the sagebrush system, and you guys get that here. It's not as big from a annual invasive side, but what we do have is cool season grass invasion, Kentucky bluegrass. But it's really hard to detect that from space to get at a biome wide level assessment. We can do that with trees and we can do that with tillage. But figuring that out is probably more local scale effort to where, and this is intended to be a broad scale assessment of the biome. And we fully recognize that the data that Tammy showed isn't going to drive real local planning, but it's going to give you an idea where these core areas are and where the threatened areas are. As you get into planning, and like we've had instances in Nebraska where we're trying to do conifer encroachments, they've actually developed additional tools to really start targeting within those yellow areas exactly where they're going to treat. So this is big, broad scale stuff. We would love to have some of that annual invasive, particularly from the cool season grass aspect built into this, but we just can't technologically build it into this biome-wide assessment.
Well, we can do that, and I'll be talking a little bit with Rangeland Monitoring Group. We can look at those things much more effectively at where we were,
Yes.
you know, in central Montana.
Yeah.
Other kind of general questions for I break you guys out so you can in small groups. Yes, Paul.
No question, and I'm not a presenter in this, but I know things I just wanted to share, so on a local scale.
Yeah.
So we started out
I was
on
thinking that.
southern scale, a greater north, Great Plains scale, talk about more regional scale, so. I just want to go back and reemphasize something that John said. So in the northern Great Plains, when you looked at that map and you were looking like at eastern North Dakota, eastern South Dakota, Iowa, almost all of that is ag conversion. And during the last 20 years, there's been times where the ag conversion was so great because of commodity prices going up that we were losing 13 acres an hour of native prairie. So when corn and soybean prices go up in that eastern areas where you have high humidity and good soils, a lot of ranchers will convert it to ag because they can make more money. So just wanted to say that. So locally, most of the conversion here as well is to ag. It's to small grains, though it's not to wheat and soybeans, but it's to small grains. The soils aren't as conducive and to ag in a lot of our country. It is like in Garfield County, there's a lot of local soils, and there's been a lot of conversion to ag. But that's what you see, and then I just wanted to touch on the conifer expansion. So unlike what John was talking about, more eastern Great Plains, here it's not invasive, non-native or whatever. Conifers, it is actually it's a pretty minor problem really in our country, but it is happening. It does exist. but it's mostly ponderosa pine and our native juniper that we see, and it's those occurrences kind of creeping out of the Missouri breaks or out of the coulees that feed into the Missouri breaks, where they're valuable and natural and should be there. So, and I would just, the people like John and the other presenters, I've been complaining about this now for the last couple of years, but the mapping is not fine scale enough to really be able to differentiate between where trees should be on the landscape versus where they shouldn't. So like when you look at that map, you'll see western CMR and then the Missouri River Breaks area, National Monument area, a lot of purple there. But those are areas that are naturally in ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and native juniper. Those are important components of that ecosystem. So, but yeah, but there is some of that creeping out, especially in the sagebrush areas that we're becoming more and more aware of and starting to really plan on doing some treatments early on before it does become a big problem, because I would consider it a big ecological problem at this point, but it could be in the future. And then ag conversion. There's not a lot of subdivisions being sprouting up all over the place.
No, they're not this side of the
Well,
state.
I've got, that full.
That's almost that's almost all conversions to soybean and corn.
And conifer. So
How do you
Up north, not down south.
and I just, a little quick fall, eastern red cedar is a native tree too.
Right.
And so that's kind of the interesting part. We always think of invasives as being non-native, when in fact our conifer encroachment issues across the west, whether or not we're talking about sagebrush in the Great Basin or eastern red cedar, are native trees. But they're just, we've removed those, particularly from the grassland side. As Tammy alluded to, we've removed the two major disturbances in our native grasslands in a lot of places. Fire being probably the biggest one. It is the most effective killer of trees out there. And historically, we had huge fires that spanned big amounts of acreage, and our scale has been reduced. So we're starting to see that tree creeping in, but we've also, in a lot of places, removed herbivory. And that's why native grazers, cattle grazers are so important to grasslands. They've evolved with grazing. And if we don't graze it, we don't wind up with health risks.